government won't do it, then we will.
Good morning, Florida! Not in my wildest dreams 9 years ago did I ever expect we'd see that video. How about America's Governor, Ron DeSantis? I know sometimes in Texas they don't really like it when I say that, but you know, the truth hurts. I told you I have a taste for reality, right? So we're going to start this morning like we always do, which is we're going to go to God. I know we had over 30 people participate in prayers this morning and hanging out in the quiet space and praying with us. So for those of you who made that, we appreciate that. If that appeals to you, we encourage you to do that. That starts early in the morning, 6:30 a.m. Is that right, Jenny? 6:45 a.m. over in the signature room, if that's something that appeals to you. So we're going to start where we always start. We're going to go to God, and I want to introduce somebody to you today because this is all about the grassroots, right? That's why we're here. That's who drives this organization. That's what we are designed to support, is to support our volunteers. And we have a very special volunteer I want to bring up to do the invocation and the pledge. Anybody in the room know Rita Peters, right? You guys know Rita? Know and love Rita like all of us. So I'm going to introduce you to this morning Rita's father-in-law, Jim Peters. Jim is a veteran of the United States Navy, served in Vietnam. He's also Shenandoah Regional Captain in Virginia. So I'd like to welcome to the stage at this time for our invocation and our pledge, Jim Peters. Jim, come on up. It's all yours, sir.
Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we gather here today because together we see how our nation has turned away from you and believe that we know you. We often look at others and feel that if we could just get them to change, then our nation could be whole again. But in your holy word, you remind us of our need to draw near to you. In 2 Chronicles 7:14, you say, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Heavenly Father, please give us both the desire and strength to do just that. In Jesus' name, amen. Where's the flag? Right there. Let's all stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Okay, so here we go, day 2. Last night was the first night. Everybody have a good time? You know, I heard some great stuff last night. First of all, where are the interns sitting right now? Are you guys all over the room? Where are my interns? Raise your hands back. They're in the back of the room. Last night I got to bed at about 1:30 a.m. I blame the interns. Just saying. The reality is, I think I kept them up. So we had some of our speakers go in and talk to the interns and hang out with those kids. And, you know, they're not really kids, they're young adults, and they're out there making waves and doing things that I wish that I had the wisdom to be doing at their age. And one of the things I talked to them about last night was how much further ahead they are, how much more they know, how much more wisdom they have than I had when I was their age. I mean, I was literally just lost when I was their age. I was doing all the stuff you shouldn't be doing when you're between 18 and 23 years old. Praise God, I lived. That's all I got to say. I don't know how that happened. But it's inspiring to me to hang out with them. If you haven't had a chance to meet our interns, I want you to do that, because when you feel dark, when you watch the news and you see crazy kids at UC Berkeley or wherever you see them doing all this crazy stuff and talking about all this crazy stuff, you need to know that that's not all of America. You need to know that there's a rising generation coming up who are great young people, who are great people doing great things already at a young age. And so if you hang out with our interns, if you see them, stop them, talk to them, get their stories, I promise you'll be as inspired as I was. It might even make you stay up until 1 a.m. in the morning hanging out with them. Really great. I also just want to thank you guys. You know, the best thing that I get to do at an event like this, and I do mean the very best thing, is to be out there hanging out with you guys. And when I walk through and meet you guys, most of you, I would say, or at least a huge percentage of you, I'm not meeting for the first time. They're familiar faces. So when we talk about having family, for me, it's this wild experience of having this huge extended family that I know from all over the country. And this is why I see your face, and what happens to me is it comes rushing back that we were together at a tobacco barn in Maryland, or in the legislature in South Dakota, or in the legislature in Utah, walking through that beautiful white building on the hill. Wherever you're from, literally wherever you're from, I've been there, and I've been there with a lot of you. So for me, being out there with you, it's a really intimate experience, and I'm renewing friendships that I've made over the last 9 years. And so I just want you to know how much I appreciate that. I appreciate that you guys come up and talk to me. I don't ever want you to feel like, oh, Mark's with somebody else, I can't come up. Always come up. It means a lot to me. It's really inspiring to me to have all these friends and people I consider family. And so the next person that I'm going to introduce you to this morning is somebody that I've come to consider as a dear friend and really part of the COS family, an intimate part of the COS family. A couple of years back now, we lost my dear friend Tom Coburn, and I loved him so much, and I traveled with him for 5 years, the last 5 years of his life. He was a true warrior for liberty. He was a great Christian man. He was an incredible mentor to me, and it was a loss to the organization, and it was a great loss personally because he was such a close friend and mentor. And there was a spot that was just empty at Convention Estates, and I remember looking around, I remember talking to Patty, and we had this conversation that spot could just never be filled. Like, I couldn't even think of anybody that I would even talk to about stepping into that senior advisor role at that level with that kind of gravitas. And yet in my life that entire time was our next speaker, Rick Santorum. And Rick and I knew each other not politically, not professionally. We had a mutual friend by the name of Foster Freese, a huge philanthropist, and he used to like to take his friends hunting and fishing. And so I met Rick as a hunter and a fisherman. We would fish together up in Canada for salmon. We would hunt pheasant in South Dakota together. And so I knew about his family. I knew him as a friend and a good man, but I never thought of him as a politician or a person that I would know professionally. And then Rick worked for CNN. A lot of you saw him on CNN. A lot of people wondered, why would he work on CNN, a good conservative guy like that? I think it's fantastic. Point of the spear, right in the heart of the beast. I loved it. Ultimately, Rick got canceled by CNN for saying conservative things. Shocking from a conservative, right? For being true to who he was, even though he was at CNN. You see these so-called Republicans or conservatives on CNN or MSNBC or whatever. Generally, they're not really Republicans, not really conservatives. That's not Rick. And so Rick called me one day and said, I'm done at CNN. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. What do you think I should do? And all of a sudden I thought, well, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of it? How about Convention of States, right? He's a man with the stature, the gravitas, the history, the presidential runs, being a senator, all the stuff. America knows him and loves him. And so we talked about it, and he'll tell you a little bit about that process. And so he came to COS. The thing that I want you to know about Rick that's much more important than the presidential runs, than being a senator, than being a true blue conservative, which he is and has always been, is what a good man he is. You know, you see people on stage, you see people in politics, they achieve things and they achieve great things, and Rick has achieved great things. And you think, okay, so that's a great person, that's a person who has achieved greatness. What we often don't know is what's behind the greatness. And unfortunately, often what's behind the greatness is something that's not so great, right? Is that it's the ego, it's the hubris that comes with achieving these levels of success. The most important thing that I can tell you about Rick Santorum is he is one of the best men I've ever met. He is a great man who is also a good man, and it is my honor and pleasure to introduce you to my good friend, Rick Santorum.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. That's overly generous, Mark. Thank you, and it's great to be here with you. I'll pick up where Mark left off, which is how did I get to COS? I did call Mark and asked him, what should I be doing? Where do you think I'm at the highest and best use? Because I've been in the conservative vineyard for a long, long time. I got elected to Congress back in 1990 and was part of the group called the Gang of Seven, and we exposed the House banking scandal and check writing and all this stuff that was going on within the in the Congress, and led to the Republican Revolution in 1994, which was the first time Republicans controlled Congress in 40 years, and came to the Senate and did welfare reform and talked on and led on the issue of abortion and marriage and a whole bunch of other controversial stuff. I was, in a sense, the conservative warrior that was out there trying to get a lot of stuff done. And back in those days, you could actually get some things done. So for me, it was always, what could I do next? Even after I lost for the United States Senate in a horrible election year of 2006, I lost by the largest margin of any incumbent senator in 30 years. And I always have to say thanks to Blanche Lincoln from Arkansas, because several years later, she lost by more than me. Otherwise, I'd still have that record. So what did I do after 2006? Well, 4 years later, I decided I'd run for president of the United States. I mean, after you lose by 18 points, what should you do? And I became, as it turned out, the conservative alternative to Mitt Romney, and darn near, I won 11 states and darn near won that primary, even though I was outspent about 6-1 in that primary. Why? Because I had a very focused conservative message that we had to get government smaller, that we had to return to the family. I wrote a book in the early 2000s called It Takes a Family. After I ran and almost won, I wrote another book called Blue Collar Conservative. Because my campaign in 2012 was about all the things that you need to do to reform a Republican or conservative coalition around blue collar workers. And by the way, the person who, I was on a radio show, and a person called me after hearing me on this radio show and said, hey, come up and see me. I want to talk to you about this book. And I did, and I talked to him, and he said, I'm thinking about running for president, and this is the book I'm going to use as my background. And I said, yeah, you'll never run, Donald. And so he did. And so I feel like I've always been at the tip of the spear of the conservative movement. And so when I called Mark, and he said, hey, have you thought about convention of states? And I said, yeah, you know what? I'm not even sure I'm for convention of states. I hadn't really thought about it. And again, I'm on the federal level. I've been a senator, running for president. Not really something that was on my radar screen. And he said, well, you should look at it. I mean, because you're all about trying to fundamentally transform the country. And I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I've been giving speeches across the country talking about how we need structural reform. That because of my experience, things have happened in Washington that the Constitution we know and love no longer is that Constitution. So I'm giving this speech across the country. I was at the Western Conservative Summit, CPAC, others, talking about how we needed to have structural reform within our Constitution. And then Mark hits me with this. So it was a God thing all over it. And the more I read about convention, the state said, why didn't I not know about this? But there's a point to this. And the point is, look, I'm a swamp creature. I've been in Washington, in and around Washington, and national politics for 30 years, and I had no idea of what convention of states really was. And I share that with you because I know a lot of you run into this issue, which is, I talk to people and they don't know nobody seems to know about what convention of states is. And that just tells you that we have so much potential out there. I know you're frustrated by that. I get frustrated by that. I go to state legislatures, like going to Pennsylvania, and most members don't know much about it. That's going to start changing. I'm just trying to let you know, that's going to start changing. Why? Success. The fact that we're at 19, what we've seen over the past, just even the past few months, is the left is starting to recognize that we're getting close. We're hovering, we're getting closer to the target. You know, if we can pick up Ohio here in the lame duck session this year and get to 20, right? So we're now getting closer. You get that squiggly line in the front, you know, that squiggly line in the front is really important. Getting to 20 is going to make a big difference because all of a sudden the national media can't ignore us, and they won't. Right now they've successfully ignored us. They thought, look, when I ran for president, I couldn't get on national TV. That's how they kill conservatives. You think they kill conservatives by going after us? No, they kill you by not covering your issues. That's the real power of the media, is what they don't print. It's not what they do print. It's what they ignore. And they've been ignoring us. But pretty soon they're going to not ignore us. And you think you had it hard before when they ignored us? You wait. Okay? They're going to start coming after us as a movement. And so we have our work cut as hard as you think our work is now. It's going to get that much harder, and we have to be that much better and that much more organized to be successful. And so that's the first message I want to communicate to you, which is things are going to start to get harder, and we're going to have to start to get better at our communications and particularly in the states that we need to accomplish to get to 34. And here's the exciting thing. We're at 31 state legislatures right now. Everyone thinks, I talk to people in Washington and conservative groups, and I'm trying to work that group a little bit, and they say, well, you know, it may be a good idea, but you have no chance of getting this done. And I said, well, you're right, the country's really divided. But you know what's really not divided is the states. The states actually, they know that you have a handful of big states that are blue states, that's how Democrats win elections and control things in the Congress. But the reality is that most states are not blue. And increasingly so, particularly thanks to Joe Biden, we have an opportunity not just to get where we are at 31. Now, don't ever applaud Joe Biden. And even if I'm being critical, don't applaud him. So we can get to, with Minnesota this year, to 32, or maybe another state like a Colorado or Washington or something like get to 33, and then next year we got elections in Virginia, and we can get to 34, and all of a sudden we'd be in a situation where all we have to do is get all the Republicans to vote yes, and we don't have a convention in 10 years or 100 years, as Mark said. We have a convention in a year or two. So this is, the reason the left is paying attention is because they see this as real. And now we have to start behaving like it's real. So a couple of things I want to talk to you about. Number one is working with legislators. Now, I'm someone who was a legislator. I was a senator for 12 years, a congressman for 4 years. And here's what I want to tell you. Legislators are people too. Okay? By the way, how many legislators do we have? If you're a legislator, stand up here. Anybody out there a legislator? I know we've at least got a couple. There's one. Tom. All right, we got 2. All right, 3. Okay. These are your heroes. Number one, they're here, right? And they're willing to lead. And so we need to make these folks your best friends. And that has to be in every state. I know most of you are conservative grassroots activists, which means, by and large, you distrust and hate the people in power. Am I wrong? Right? They're worthless, they're rhinos, whatever, you call them whatever you want. The problem is, you need them. Okay? And the reality is, I don't know too many. I cut my teeth when I was a kid in the state legislature. I was a staff person there. I don't know any state legislator who goes there to become rich, famous, and powerful. That's not where you become rich, and that's not where you become really powerful. You go to Washington for that these days. Most legislatures are there just trying to do what's best for their community and their state. Now, not all of them, but the vast majority. And they're part-time, and and they have jobs, and they have other things going on, and they just want to do the best they can and keep it simple. What they really need, what you really want, if you want to be effective as a leader of convention of states, you need to befriend these legislators. You need to be their best friend. You need to be their supporter. You need to be there for them. If you have someone who's a supporter of COS and they don't know you and you're in your community, that's your fault, not theirs. You need to make these people know that you are on their side, you support them, and you are there for them when they need you, not when you need them. It's like any friendship. What kind of friend is just there when they're doing things for you? That's not what friendship is. And believe it or not, these legislators respond to human interaction. Right? And so I know that there's this attitude that this is the enemy, that they're the enemy because they did this wrong or they did that wrong. Well, yes, they probably did. They probably had some bad votes, but you don't care about those votes. I know you do. But when you're here and you're wearing the COS badge, you care about one vote. That's the most important thing that you have to remember. Because I know you're all activists and you're concerned about lots of different votes. You're concerned about election reform. You're concerned about pro-life. You're concerned about all these things. All good things. You need to be. But there's nothing more important than you're doing, and that's why you're here, than getting this resolution passed in your state. Because this is a moment in time when our country is at stake, and the only thing we can do to save the division that's happening in this country is federalism, and the only hope for that is convention of states. So I'm not saying you shouldn't work on pro-life issues or Second Amendment issues or other issues that you're concerned about. CRT and transing the kids and all that stuff's important. Don't get me wrong. And you may have legislators that, are wrong on those issues. But when you go up there wearing the COS badge, the person that is in our corner needs to have your full support. Period. I know that's hard sometimes. But it's really important. If we're going to get this done, we have to build relationships. If your state legislator doesn't know you, if the leader of your effort, let me ask you a question. Those who are in states that haven't passed this bill yet, how many of you, I'm not going to ask for hands because it's not important. How many of you know the sponsor of your bill, actually have a relationship with them, have a relationship with the House member, the Senate member, and the other supporters? If the answer is no, then you got to change that. Because that's the only way we're going to win. We have to be known. We're not, at least at this point, we're not being talked about on the national media a lot, which means they're not going to hear about us from their general interaction in the day. I mean, you all tell me this. You're frustrated that we don't get enough national attention. Again, that's going to change. It's not going to be good, but that's okay. The fact is, if the national media is beating us up, that's a challenge, but it's also a benefit because conservatives now know that, hey, we're one of them, right? So please, number one thing to do is to start thinking about building relationships with your member of Congress. So that's number one. Number two, you're doing the most important thing that you're working with legislatures, and you need to convince them they're doing the most important thing they will ever do as a state legislator. They were set up in the Constitution of being the check to tyranny in Washington. The founders trusted them above anybody else. They put lots of checks and balances in the Constitution. Some of them have been ripped away. But the fail-safe was the Article 5 state legislators because they trusted the people closest to the people to check. They knew was coming a tyranny at the federal level. And so you have to convince these members And you have to have the passion that this is about the survival of our nation. This is about what is the most important thing they will ever do. The most important vote they will ever cast is a vote to restore our republic. Right? People ask me all the time, why are you involved in this? Why are you doing this? I've told you, I think it's the next conservative thing to do. But the reason at my age and after having been involved in 30 years that I'm still doing this is one word: guilt. In my time on the national scene, this country has gone to hell in a handbasket. I mean, you think about where we were 40 years ago when Ronald Reagan was president. And think of what the culture looks like now, what the debt and the size of the federal government looks like now. And as I look around this room, I see mostly folks who have the same color hair I have. And that means all of us had this happen on our watch. You know, many of you have parents who were part of the greatest generation. What made them the greatest generation? Were they really better than us? Well, maybe they were. But here's what made them the greatest generation. They had an existential challenge to the future of Western civilization, and they rose to the occasion and met it and won. And they were willing to make the sacrifices. Hundreds of thousands of young men and women died during that conflict. They were willing to do whatever it took to save freedom and our republic. That's what made them great. They met the challenge of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, let's just be honest. We have not met the challenge of the day. We are letting this country, the greatest country in the history of the world, become a tyrannical, sick culture. Washington has become tyrannical, and our culture, as Billy Graham famously said, if God doesn't punish what's happening here in the United States, then he owes an apology to Sodom and Gomorrah. Amen? That's us. We let this happen under wall. You can say, well, no, Senator, I did this, and I tried this, and I worked hard on this. You know what? I'm someone that doesn't give good marks for participation trophies. I'm not interested in how hard you tried. I'm interested in what we accomplish. And let's be honest, we failed America. I don't know about you. I don't want to be the generation that history looks back on and says, these people lost the greatest experiment in freedom and democracy in the history of the world. We did. No, don't applaud that. Don't applaud that. We need to own that. We need to own the fact that it was on our watch that our country began to fail, is on a path to destruction. And the question is, can we take this generation that has failed America and become the greatest generation that saved America? And I believe in my whole heart and soul that at the core of that is this movement. And here's the real challenge to you. I know a lot of you come up and talk to me about, all these people aren't even aware of what's going on. They don't even realize what COS is and how bad things are. Here's the issue. You do. You know how bad it is. You know what's in store for America. And that's a burden that you now have been given by God to carry. And that means, I always say this is one of my favorite lines in the Bible. Too much is given, much is expected. Too more is given, more is required. There's no generation in the history of the world that's been given more than ours. We have things like this that 20 years ago was a supercomputer. And there was one of in the world. Now we carry them around in our pockets. We have money, we have food, we have technology, we have every creature comfort. When those lines were written in the Bible, rich people would be considered the poorest of the poor in America today. We are the wealthiest. We have been given the most, which means we have the highest burden to deliver. You are here at this event, and you are involved in this movement because you have been chosen. Yes, you can say, well, I signed up. No, I don't believe anything is I signed up. The Lord motivated you to do what you're doing and called you to be here. And the question is, are you going to do whatever it takes? The left wins because they are willing to do whatever it takes to win. Now, we won't do whatever it takes because we're only going to do good things to whatever it takes, not corrupt things. But the question is, are you willing to make the sacrifice? And here's what I will tell you. From my experience in working lots of issues over a long time, if you are faithful, God will be faithful. So I ask each and every one of you to make the real commitment. The commitment that this country needs of a great generation to save our land and return our country to the republic it can be again. Thank you all very much, and God bless you. All right, you're going to sit on that side.
You see why I fell in love with Rick Santorum? So Rick, you know, what I want to do is, and I talked a little bit about this when I introduced you, is people know you from this kind of stuff, and they see you give inspiring speeches, and they've seen you on television, they watched you running for president all over the country. This morning, it was so interesting to me because I was sitting backstage going through run of show and getting ready, and Jackson, who heads our intern program, came back and he said, man, Rick Santorum's just out there walking around, hanging out with people, and I said, well, that's the real Rick. Like, that's what he loves to do. He's just one of us. And I think that makes you unusual as a national political figure, right? Because you see all these national political figures, and they get all the fame, and they're surrounded by staff, and they start to be separated from the people. So that never, for whatever reason, that never went to your head. So I want to dig in a little bit. Tell our folks a little bit about where you were raised and what your family was like, so they get a little bit of where you come from.
My father was an immigrant to this country. He was came over from Italy when he was a boy. My grandfather came from northern Italy. He was anti-fascist. Mussolini came into power, so he left, ended up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania as a coal miner. He mined coal for 50 years until he was almost 70 years of age. Grew up in a company town, so, you know, 2-room house with a dirt floor. So that more than anybody else, my mom's family was an immigrant family too. They one generation away. My grandfather was the first born in this country, also from Italy. And so it was and my parents met after the war. My dad was in World War II, and they met after the war, both working for the Veterans Administration. So I actually spent the first 18 years of my life in public housing, if you will, but I lived on the grounds of a Veterans Administration. And it was I guess a unique upbringing, somewhat like an Army brat in some respects. We moved from VA to VA around, and but I grew up with a deep, great reverence and respect for veterans, particularly because when I was in my formative years in the 70s, veterans were a dirty word. I remember, you know, watching TV and seeing all these protests and how they were, you know, being horrible to our men and women in uniform, and then then opening up my front door and seeing these veterans who sacrificed so much and are struggling so much with whether it was physical ailments or mental health ailments. And people say, how did you become a conservative? I said, I didn't become a conservative. I just knew I didn't want to be like these people on the left who didn't respect our veterans. And that sort of was sort of formative for me. And to me, that was a window into the left-right movement of this country. And so anyway, I also, obviously my parents worked for the government. I didn't see government as a bad thing. I saw them as trying to help people. And so I came at it a little different than most conservatives did, which is I saw government as something that could be a force for good. And that it wasn't, while I loved Ronald Reagan and supported him, I didn't necessarily see government as the problem. Now, having said that, once I got involved in politics, I started to change my opinion. and I saw government as more of a problem than a solution, because we went way beyond the bounds of anything that we considered to be constitutional government. But that's how I sort of got into it, and felt that I was being called into somehow serving the country.
Did you grow up in a big family?
I had a brother and a sister. My mom and dad, because of the war, got married later in life. They were in their 30s, which was old to get married back in the 1950s. My mother was darn near 40 years old when I was born, which was ancient back then. And so it was we were a small family. Like I said, we were not political. I don't think my father ever voted when I was a kid, and he felt it was he didn't want to be involved in politics. And my mom, I think she voted, but I don't really know what party she was. So it was sort of a strange atmosphere, but it was one that allowed me to make some decisions, and I'm happy I made them.
So you have in a way, a famous public family. I mean, you've been a guy that stood for the family for so long, and so that's kind of brought a little bit your family into the public eye. Tell us a little bit about your family.
So Karen and I were married 2 weeks after the primary in 1990 when I was running for Congress for the first time. We got pregnant 3 months later, got elected a month after that, and then started serving in Congress. So it was a big deal. My life has always been, and married life has always been in public life. And we tried to balance the public life and the family. And we did so primarily through just putting the family first and making sure that everything was as good as it possibly could be to weather the storms that were coming. And so we homeschooled our kids. We believed, this was back in the 90s when very, very few people homeschooled, and it was considered really weird. And it was an election issue. I mean, I was criticized for homeschooling my kids, but it's the greatest thing we ever did. Recommend it to everybody. I mean, everybody. That it's I have relationships with my kids because we were involved in forming them in their faith and in their morality and their ethics, and yeah, we cared about academics, but that was fourth or fifth in our line. Academics, you can pick those up along the way. You're not going to pick up the ethical and moral and values and spiritual values along the way in this country anymore. There's plenty of opportunities with our little computers and everything to gain knowledge and information, but to form children to be prepared for the hostile world that is America today and is Western civilization today needs a lot more effort on the part of moms and dads. And I think that's the thing. We're again, part of the greatest generation is, we didn't, the greatest generation thought that the culture would do for their children what it did for them, but it's not the same culture. And I think one of the reasons that the boomers and everybody sort of fell apart and America fell apart is because they trusted their children to the culture. That is suicidal or homicidal in the case of parents to do that to your children today. And so it's harder to be a parent today. It's a lot more work. But there's nothing, and you know this, but there's nothing, no more important thing you can do than protecting the souls of your children. I always tell people that we had 8 children, and I didn't get married till I was 32. We had our last child when I was 50, and my wife was 48. So go there, and so it was one of those things. We were just open. We believe that the greatest thing you can do in your life, the only thing you do in your life, really it's true, the only thing you do in your life that lasts, the only thing you do that is eternal is working and cooperating with God to create an eternal soul. Everything else goes away. So you want to make a difference in the world, then leave the world with good souls that can make a better world. And so that's a lesson that we don't tell our children and we don't tell our grandchildren how important that the family is, but it is the most important. It's most important. That's why I wrote a book called It Takes a Family. Hillary Clinton wrote a book back in the late 90s called It Takes a Village, and so I wrote a response. And she was in the Senate at the time.
Only one of you was right, by the way.
Yeah, but I said, that conservatives have to focus on family policy. We have to focus on building stronger families. And I think we've seen the consequences of not doing that, and I think it's another important part of the conservative movement.
So you have 8 kids, and all miracles, because every kid is a miracle.
Yeah.
But you have one kid that is actually famous, and probably a
Yeah, we
kid
wrote a book about her.
Yeah, that you probably never expected to be the famous kid. Can you talk a little bit about Bella?
Yeah, when I was 50, we had a little girl named Isabella Maria, and she was born, we found out after she was born, with a condition called trisomy 18. You've probably heard of trisomy 21. That's called Down syndrome. And that's a child born with an extra 21st chromosome. And so having that extra chromosome disrupts the development in the womb and has certain characteristics that you are now familiar with. Everybody knows a Down syndrome kid. Although if you live in Iceland, they have eliminated Down syndrome. They're very proud of that, and which means they kill all of the Down syndrome children in the womb. But they said they've ridded themselves of Down syndrome. If you ever met a Down syndrome child, you probably know what they call in the Down syndrome world. They have an extra chromosome, and they call it the love chromosome because they're the sweetest, most wonderful children. But to a world that is utilitarian, they see Down syndrome as a burden. I see it as a gift from God. And our daughter has trisomy 18, which is a much, much more severe genetic defect. 90% of kids who have trisomy 18 die at or before birth. Of those that survive, 90% die within the first few months. And Bella beat all the odds, and I always say, we did a great job as parents, but Bella has been the greatest gift our family's had. Having a child with special needs in a family can tear a family apart. In fact, most families, it does tear them apart. We were very blessed that we accepted the burden. Life is about struggle. It's about burden. I don't know if you've read the Bible, but if you have, show me all the passages where God promised an easy life. None. He promised struggle. He didn't say, pick up your box of chocolates and follow me. He said, pick up your cross. It says before he was crucified, he said, pick up your cross and follow me. And so we were blessed because, we're strong believers. We were blessed in thinking that, every child's a blessing. So we accepted Bella. It was hard. I mean, she can't walk. She can't talk. She can't, she gets fed by a G-tube. She doesn't do anything. She's a permanent 6-month-old. And so she needs complete, total care. And it's been the greatest blessing. We wrote a book called Bella's Gift. And we wrote 18 chapters. Karen and I decided we were going to write the book together. And then after an hour of sitting there writing the book together, we decided that wasn't going to work.
Because you have a normal marriage.
Yes, we have a normal marriage. And so we decided 18 chapters that she would write half and I would write half. So we'd divide the chapters. So she wrote 11 chapters, I wrote 7. And
appropriately divided in a normal marriage.
Well, I mean, women have more to say than men, so it works out that way. And every chapter begins with love is. Because Bella, we always say Bella's our teacher. She teaches us what love is. And because you love by giving. You know, that's how you love. That's how, and by the way, that's the key to happiness. That's what we found. And so we wrote this book, and I'll give you one example. I mean, so many profound things that happened with Bella, but one was standing over her bed and just seeing her and realizing that, you know, she'd never be able to make me a coffee or be able to do anything for me, that she is totally dependent. She has nothing. She has no ability to do anything for me. Yet, when I looked at her, I knew, and she displays all the time how much she loves me. And I sat there and I thought, you know, that's how the Lord looks at me. I can do nothing for him. I am completely disabled compared to him. And all he wants from me is to love him. And so Bella is... So Bella has been the great teacher. People have said that when I was in politics, Bella was born after I left the Senate, that I've mellowed since I was in politics, and that's true. Part of it is age, but I think a big part of it is my daughter, and I think it's been for the best.
So now you're at the point where you're having grandkids, and about a year ago, a miraculous, they're all miraculous, but a miraculous grandchild came into your life. Can you tell the story of Zelda?
Yeah, so one of the things I realized is that God, as I said before, if you're faithful, God will be faithful. And my daughter has been married 5 years, and last year, you know, they've been trying to have a child, and they haven't been able to have a child. And so they went and we're Catholic, and so she prayed and prayed and prayed and went on a pilgrimage and to her favorite saint. Her saint is Saint Therese of Lisieux, and so she again, prayed. She said, "Look, if you somehow give us a child, I'll name the child after your mom or your dad." And so that was sort of the framework. And so she gets a call on October 1st from a friend of hers who's at church in a mass. And the priest at the end of Mass got up and said, hey, there's a woman in our community who's decided to give her child up for adoption. She's due in 2 weeks. And there's a chance that the child may have some genetic issues. There's nothing in the sonogram. Everything looks normal, but there's some potential genetic abnormalities. And so this woman who happens to be a friend of my daughter's calls her from the back of the church and says, hey, this is what's going on, and the priest was there, and she said, you need to talk to my friend. So the priest gets on the phone with her, and long story short, within a couple days, she has a meeting with the mom, and in Maryland. And so she goes up and meets her, and then the mom sits across her and says, well, tells her story. She's married, she has a 4-year-old, but not sure that she's capable of handling any child that has any special needs. They're not doing well financially, and they've got some issues in the home and all this kind of stuff. And so Elizabeth says, okay, that's great. She said, in fact, I actually contemplated having an abortion. And she pulls out her phone and hands her phone to Liz. It's like an iPhone 6. She says, this phone does crazy things sometimes. And shortly after I'd found out that I was pregnant, and we were going through this, I pulled out my phone, and the phone had called somebody. And by the time I realized that the phone had called somebody, the person had picked up the phone, and it was a priest. And I didn't even know I had the priest in the contact. I hadn't talked to the priest in 4 or 5 years, but it called this priest. And so I picked up the phone, and she said, Father, my phone called you by mistake, but maybe I'm supposed to talk to you. And so she talked to the priest, and the priest connected her to a crisis pregnancy center. And the crisis pregnancy center works with a group of nuns in Washington, D.C. called the Sisters of Life. And so they connect to the Sisters of Life, and they start counseling her. And she said that, that the sister that she talked to wanted to send her a book. And so she sent her a book, and said, what's the book? She said, Bella's Gift. And Elizabeth's like, oh, okay. She said, did you read the book? And she said, well, it was a really trying time for me, so I read the introduction. And I was just so moved, I decided at that point that I wasn't going to have an abortion. And Elizabeth said, well, you should know a couple things. First off, that book is about my sister. And that while my parents wrote the book, I wrote the introduction. And the mom said, and she said, well, you should know that I didn't read the whole book, as I told you, but I keep the book at my bedside. And it's still at my bedside. And every night before I go to bed, I look at that book, and I look at your mom and dad, and I say a prayer that whoever adopts my little girl will love her as much as they love Bella. And Elizabeth says, well, you should know one other thing. The sister that you talked to, could that have been Sister Mary Doolittle? And the mom says, well, yes, it was. She said, how would you know? She said, well, 5 months ago, I was at a conference with Sister Mary Doolittle. And she's someone who I've gotten to know over the years, and she talked to me about a couple that she was counseling, a woman she was counseling who had a child that might have some issues, and that she told me that she sent her a book, the book, Bella's Gift. And then she asked me to pray for that woman and the little girl. So I've been praying for you and your daughter for the last 5 months. And so she saw that as, and she does to this day, that this little girl was meant for our family. And interesting thing, I told you that she prayed to St. Therese of Lisieux. Well, the feast day of St. Therese of Lisieux in the Catholic calendar is October 1st, which is the day she got the call. And so we are very, very blessed. And I always tell this story that I told this story to a friend of mine, and his immediate response was, I just bought a white pickup truck. And I said, okay. He said, you know what I found out? I said, no, what did you find out? He said, everywhere I go, I see white pickup trucks. Did you realize how many white pickup trucks there are out there in America? When you drive around, there are white pickup trucks everywhere. And I said, okay. He said, it's like God. Until you experience God, you don't realize He's everywhere. And so, and this is what I keep coming back to. Zelly was a little girl like our Bella who had some disabilities. She was a little girl that was going to be aborted. I spent 30 years of my life working on the disabled and to save children from abortion. And God just said, thank you. God will be faithful. If there's any message I can leave to you as you take on what seems to be an impossible challenge to save the nation that He loved the most, if you are faithful, so will He be. God bless you.
Rick Santorum. Oh. Man, you see why I love that man so much? What a family, and what an incredible privilege to have Rick as part of the Convention of States family and his whole family, right? Okay, I gotta take a breath and recover here. Now, I know that story, and I've heard that story, and she's a year old now, by the way, so, and just a wonderful, beautiful part of that family. God's at work. We've got a lot of friends and family in COS, and our family, if you think about it historically, goes way back to the founding. Because what we're all about is Article 5, and Article 5 gets put into the Constitution back in September of 1787. And one of the most important days in American history, in my opinion, it's not celebrated except by us, is September 15th. Okay, and why is September 15th the most important day in American history? It's Patty's birthday. Come on, get with it, people. Okay, it's also the day that Colonel George Mason stood up and addressed those men who were debating the Constitution. They're almost done. It's 2 days before the end of the Constitutional Convention. They're done with the document, and he stands up and he complains. He talked a lot at convention, by the way, second or third most at convention, so they were probably like, oh, seriously, Colonel, sit down. We've had enough of you. And he says we've got a problem with the document. We created a document that gave the power to Congress to propose amendments if they deemed them necessary, but we didn't give the power to the people acting through the states. And then he asked a question which resonates across the ages, which is, are we so naive to believe that a government that becomes a tyranny will propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? We know the answer. We saw Madison's notes. They say nin com, which is Latin abbreviation for no comment. Nobody debates it. Nobody stands against it. Nobody raises their hand and objects. And we know that that clause, the second clause of Article 5, gets inserted into the Constitution unanimously. No debate, unanimous insertion. And because of that event, September 15, 1787, because of that man, a great friend of the United States of America, an anti-federalist, by the way, they were right. Anti-federalist, he stood up, he made that objection, he said the thing in the moment, I believe, inspired by God, that has all of you in this room today, literally, all of us, personally, connected to our good friend and somebody I want to introduce you to right now, Colonel George Mason. Great honor, Colonel Mason.
Thank you, sir.
for being
Thank
here.
you. Thank you. Well, if you're expecting the gold of oratory or the silver of rhetoric, prepare to be disappointed. For such silver and gold have I none. I am no Patrick Henry. But what I do have I give unto thee, which is reason and principle. Chief among them being that all men are by nature equally free and independent and possess certain inherent rights. And secondly, that all power was originally lodged in and consequently is derived from the people. These principles, coherent with our Holy Scriptures, implicit in the Magna Carta, inherent in the English Bill of Rights of 1689, and thoroughly explicated in philosophy by men such as John Locke and others, are so manifest to reason that, as Mr. Jefferson so eloquently stated it in our Declaration, we hold them to be self-evident. Now, I know that I have acquired the name and reputation of an anti-federalist. It is not an appellation that I willingly sought. I would much rather be known for what I am for, which is liberty, rather than what I am against. Nevertheless, I do not deny that I am adamantly opposed to the Federalists' vision for our constitutional republic. Not that I am opposed to the Constitution, but that I believe under their construction it affords insufficient safeguards against the very yoke of tyranny which we threw off our necks with much expense of money, time, hardship, and blood. It was never my intent to cast myself as an opponent of a national constitution as I have been slanderously accused, nor against men who are my friends, with whom I ardently strove for our dear independence. How then did we come to such loggerheads? If you will permit me, I will offer a brief recitation of the circumstances that brought us to this place. Year 1776 was momentous, not only for the founding of the United States, but many forget for the founding of the states themselves. which had to resurrect new governments out of the collapsed rubble of the old colonial ones. I was charged with framing the government for Virginia. And in spite of my failing health, my innate distaste for politics and the public life, I accepted the charge because of the necessity of the time. If you will give me leave, I will continue from the chair. Oh, long have I been afflicted with the gout. It is the messenger of Satan sent to buffet me. I consider myself a pleasant gentleman, but I do confess that when my malady flares up, it might tend to make me irascible. I pray you forbear. As I was saying, I accepted the charge, and I confined myself to a room in the Raleigh Inn there in Williamsburg, and I set to work. But before I wrote a single word concerning the structure of government, I set forth first the most necessary document for any government of a free people, which is a Declaration of Rights, containing not only the principles for our government, but more importantly, enumerating several rights of persons, including the right of the people to reform, alter, or abolish their government, the right to a free and independent press, an indispensable bulwark of liberty, the right of the accused to due process of law, the right to the free exercise of religion according to one's own conscience. It should be noted that the stronger wording of this latter article, young Mr. Madison had a hand in that. I had originally penned one concerning religious toleration, but Madison objected that toleration speaks merely of a concession, but religious liberty is a right. And his point is well taken. Other amendments were perhaps not so felicitous, but in substance the document passed after far too much debate. And other states began to use that as a pattern for their own declarations of rights. And then we went on to pass a constitution for Virginia, which overall I was pleased with the result. In retrospect, I think there was one glaring fault, and that is that we failed to impart to it a means to amend it. But in 1776, we had very little time to nitpick. Every moment then and thereafter was perilous, even unto the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. When I finally felt free to return once and for all to Gunston Hall, there to mind my business, enjoy my children, and nurse my many infirmities. But in 1787, that spring, I was called back into public service, being elected to the Virginia delegation to amend the Articles of Confederation. And we all knew that we were actually going to replace it. And to the surprise of many, I did not decline the appointment, for I believed, as I wrote to my son George, that the revolt against Great Britain was nothing compared to the great business which now lay before us. Philadelphia, furthest I'd ever been from my home. First time I'd ever truly left Virginia. I enjoyed seeing the sights, Independence Hall, all of these things. At last meeting Dr. Franklin, oh yes. But I quickly grew weary of all of the etiquette and nonsense so prevalent in that, so fashionable in that city. But I was heartened by the caliber of those who attended the convention, so far above the usual run-of-the-mill politician. I truly did feel that all the hopes of the Union were centered in this convention. But it was very nearly exploded. Our very first controversy right out of the gate was trying to reconcile the interests of the larger states with those of the less populous ones, and it was a sore test. I lie not. Had we failed to find common ground on this issue, the entire convention would have collapsed and dissolved before it even got started. Dr. Franklin and I united to lead a committee which hammered out what became known as the Great Compromise, the bicameral legislature with a lower chamber elected according to population and an upper one with equal representation for the states. And it passed. And then we could get on to debate every other issue, and debate we did. I was keenly interested, as Mr. Macklin mentioned a moment ago, in the amendment process. Almost all of my colleagues felt no qualms with letting Congress be the sole proponent of all amendments. But I insisted that there must be an alternative path. And so we did impart to our Constitution in Article 5 a provision for a convention of states, for I feel that there will come a day when we will need to wrest our government from the vested interest of tenured power. For in politics, tenure is power, my friends, and power is an intoxicating temptation, even for a good man, let alone for the mediocre souls who so often inhabit that occupation. On other issues, I was less successful in debate. Slavery, the power of the Senate, the issue of term limits. Most distressing of all was the failure of the convention. No, not the failure, the refusal to impart to the Constitution a Declaration of Rights. Oh, it vexed me to see such intelligent men be so short-sighted. On this issue, I could not compromise. But in September, the document came up for a vote, all members signing who were present, save 3, Governor Randolph, Elbridge Gerry, and me. And then the debate for ratification raged, and you know, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay wrote their pamphlets, I wrote mine, and their side prevailed. The Constitution was ratified. During this time, my friendship of many years with General Washington greatly cooled. Oft have I been a guest at Mount Vernon, and we have exchanged many, many hours of conversation, of exchange of ideas, of warm fellowship. I have not been invited to his home, nor have we spoken since the convention. So be it. He has his convictions and his mission in life, and I have mine. Let it be known that I have never objected to Washington, the man being elected to the executive office. No more worthy a man can be found in the world. As for me, well, I was greatly encouraged and indeed mostly satisfied with the Bill of Rights that of late has been added to our Constitution by amendment. If only we had done it in Philadelphia, so much discomfiture could have been avoided. Hold tight to those rights, my friends, for politicians do not need the title of king to grasp for kingly power. But if worse comes to worst, we still have recourse to a convention of states, have we not? I think I'm going to go for coffee. You're welcome to join me. All us patriots quit tea in '74, you know. Thank you, Colonel.
Colonel George Mason. What a treat. We have a long history. You have a long history, and that is part of your history. It's really important, and I'm going to encourage you, know that history, but also know the history of Convention of States. I want you to pay attention. We've been around 9 years. You know 19 states have passed. There's a lot of stuff that's happened along the way. I don't know if any of you heard, but I did an interview with Sebastian Gorka last week. Did any of you get a chance to hear that? One of the things that we talked about was so funny. He said, "This seems like a lot of work." I said, yes, exactly. 9 years of overnight success. That's our history. So know your history. It's very important. Since the early days, part of our history of Convention of States is we have another friend who's been a stalwart supporter, somebody who's willing to step up early on and put his name on it and put his support into it. Somebody that you know from American politics in many different roles as a warrior. He is actually a warrior. He's somebody with a military background. But again, like everybody that you're going to see on stage today, what I want you to know is what good men they are, what friends they are to you, to me, to all of us. And this gentleman would, I could call him anywhere in the country and tell him there's a firefight going on, and I mean a firefight, and he would come. He would be there for you, he would be there for me, he'd be there for anybody in the conservative movement that needs him. And I think the best way that I could describe Allen West is as probably the single best articulator of what it means to be a patriotic, God-fearing, Constitution-loving conservative in the United States of America. It is my privilege to introduce our good friend, Allen West. Make it happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I'm going to tell you something. How really unfair it is to bring out a colonel that was smart and had a part in writing the Constitution of the United States of America, and I got to follow that, and I'm just a dumb Army colonel that used to jump out of airplanes. Hey, Colonel George, you still back there? Hey, Colonel. Come here, Colonel George. Because I think it'd be pretty cool to get a picture of two colonels up here on stage. All right, come on. I know your gout's getting to you, but come on. All right, here we go. All right. Let me tell you why Colonel George Mason is one of my favorite founding fathers. Because he has a quote from 17 June 1787 that says, "Nothing so greatly impels a man to regard the interests of his constituents than the certainty of returning to the general mass of the people from whence he was taken, where he shall share in their burdens." Because this man did not believe that we should have career politicians, that people up in Washington, D.C. or wherever should be there as a permanent job. He meant for them to answer a call to duty, to call to service. He wanted citizen legislators. He did not want professional politicians. And everyone take a picture of this because everyone says that, you know, the founding fathers are a bunch of racists and whatever. And I'm sitting here with a founding father, and this is my buddy, my pal, Colonel George Mason. All right. You may go back to the 18th century now.
It's much more comforting there.
Yeah, it is. Y'all didn't have any critical race theory in the 18th century. Karl Marx wasn't even born yet. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with each and every one of you. And what Mark asked me to come and talk to you all about was a call to duty. And when I think about a call to duty, first and foremost, how many soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guards when we have in the audience? Please stand so we can recognize you and thank you for your service. Every single one of these men and women, they answered a call to duty. When you did not know them, they understood and they knew you. They knew you as the American people. They knew that all of us, which binds us together as brothers and sisters, is not just that call to duty, not just the fact that some of us chewed the same dirt, went out and deployed, left our families. Maybe we lost some of our best friends, our comrades. But what brought us together was an oath to that document that Colonel George Mason was integral in establishing the longest running constitutional republic that the world has ever known. Because we all stood up on one day in our lives. For me, it was 31 July 1982 at the University of Tennessee Stokely Athletic Center, and we repeated those words. We said that we would support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We said that we would bear true faith and allegiance to the same. And that is what a call to duty is all about. But when I think about what is one of the greatest calls to duty that was part of the establishment of these United States of America, well, you know, those Air Force people, they're really smart. I tried to get into the Air Force and I failed their entrance test because I couldn't fly nothing. But there was another entrance test, and it was asked me a very basic question. What does a red light mean? I said, stop. What does a green light mean? I said, go. Well, son, you can be an Army paratrooper right now. Okay? So in the Army, we're not as smart as the Air Force, so we write stuff down. That's what we were taught. And so that's why I still, to this day, have my 3x5 cards. Air Force guys, it just flows out of their brain. They're just that smart. But here's a call to duty that I want to share with you that has relevance to where we are today. These are the times which try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country, his duty. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. 19 December 1776, Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine was asked to write a simple pamphlet to inspire people, to get them to understand this call to duty, to make sure that we could establish this incredible nation based upon individual liberty. And Thomas Paine wrote that pamphlet called The Crisis. You all are here today, and the theme of this gathering is reclaiming liberty, because in 246 short years, we have forgotten what liberty really is. We have forgotten that this country, what Colonel George Mason established for us, was based upon an understanding that the individual, their rights, their freedoms, their liberty, they are sovereign over the institution of government. And why is the individual in America sovereign over the institution of government? Because unlike any other nation in the world, your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness, or if you know John Locke's second treatise of government, 1683, he said property. It naturally comes from our Creator God. And that's why Thomas Jefferson invoked John Locke in the Declaration of Independence when he talked about the laws of nature, nature's God, natural rights theory. You're sovereign over government. But in 246 years, we've forgotten that. In 246 years, there are people that we have elected into office, they have forgotten that. They have forgotten the quote from Colonel George Mason, that they are there to serve us. They are not there to enrich themselves. They are there based upon the consent of you all, and us, and as we say down south, of the governed. And so what is your charge? What is your call to duty? Because we are in a crisis moment. And when Colonel George Mason created those words that were implanted into the Article 5, and so many people say, well, why is, Colonel West, that we have never used that? We have never invoked that. Because we have never been in such a crisis between understanding the relationship between government and the individual, understanding that the Constitution is a restraining document on the powers of the federal government, understanding that the individual is supreme and sovereign over the federal government. So now it is time, thanks to you all, thanks to Mark Meckler, thanks to the Convention of States, thanks to what you're doing every single day, because there's a little thing on the wall that says, break glass in case of an emergency. That is what Article 5 Convention of States says. We are at that emergency situation. In the Constitution of the United States of America, Article 1, Section 8. How many people here got your Constitution? Colonel going to call you out now. How many people got it? Okay, you got to do push-ups. Some of y'all are saying, Colonel, you can't make me do push-ups. You're right, I'm just a civilian now. But just throw me a bone, okay? But if you're saying that you're going out and you're answering a call to duty, and a call to duty is something that's part of the Constitution, but yet you're not carrying this around with you, you're not ready to answer that call to duty. And if you think about it, the reason why we find ourselves in this crisis situation is because not enough of us are carrying this. Not enough of us are reading this. It is not that it is not being taught to our children, because civics is gone. History is gone. I mean, our kids are being told that you don't have to be a little boy, you can be a little girl, you don't have to be a little girl, you can be a little boy, you don't have to tell your parents. But if we could get back to this foundation, and it starts with each and every one of you. So my challenge, first and foremost, anytime you go out of your house, because you're on a battlefield. Now, what soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsman on the battlefield, in the combat zone, is going to go out of their tent, go out for their forward operating base without their weapon? Only an idiot. You don't want to be an idiot. So when you leave out of your house, you need to have your weapon, because this empowers you. And in this document, Article 1, Section 8, it lists the 17 things that are the duties, responsibilities, jurisdictions, purviews of the federal government. Show me where it says in Article 1, Section 8 that the federal government has the ability to decide who or what's essential, to shut down whatever business that they want. Benjamin Franklin said those who would surrender essential liberty for temporary security in the end will deserve neither liberty nor security. That's why we're here today, talking about reclaiming liberty, because we've completely forgot what liberty is. First and foremost, let me tell you, you want to know where liberty truly comes from? Pick up the other book that you're supposed to read and meditate upon day and night, not turn from it from the right or to the left. And who was told that? It was Joshua was told that by God. He said that if you do that, you will have success and prosperity wherever you go. In 2 Corinthians 3 and 17, it says that the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, there is liberty also. So we've got to get back to that fundamental, that very basic. Because what the federal government is now saying is that, well, God wasn't smart enough to get male and female right, Adam and Eve right. You have the liberty to go out there and choose whatever gender you want. God couldn't get weather right. I was a congressman here in the state of Florida, just right down the road in Fort Lauderdale. And I remember someone asking me, well, Congressman West, do you believe in climate change? I said, yeah, winter, spring, summer, and fall. But see, now the thing is that God couldn't get the weather right. He can't get any of these things right. And what is the purpose of that? Because the progressive socialist left, the Marxists, are seeking to undermine the very fundamentals of this nation. Because if God can't get gender right, if God can't get the weather right, then how can he get all of this inalienable rights thing right? How can he endow you with stuff? Because he's not smart enough to figure that stuff out. But we, government with the little g, we can do it. And if you don't study and understand what government is supposed to be able to do, then the next thing you know, they're going to come in and they're going to take over every single aspect of your life. Abraham Lincoln, in April of 1864, gave us a clear delineation between what liberty and tyranny is in a speech at the Baltimore Sanitary Fair. He told us that liberty means a person, a man, being able to do what they want with themselves and the product of their labor. While the other thing was when other men decide what to do with other men and the product of other men's labor. And where do you think we are today in 246 short years? So the whole purpose of y'all being here to reclaim liberty means you've got to answer the call. You've got to step up to the plate. You all are leaders in this movement. And let me share with you what the Army taught me about leadership. It's called the 5 C's. And please, if you like, write these down. Because if you're going to be a leader on this battlefield, if you're going to answer the call of duty, if you're going to go out there and stand up and fight for the Constitution of the United States of America, you've got to be prepared and trained and ready. The first C is courage. How many of y'all remember that incredible miniseries, Band of Brothers? Now remember that miniseries, Band of Brothers? Well, you remember that unit, the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, was training up in North Georgia, Toccoa Mountain, That was historically the ancestral lands of the Cherokee Indians. And therefore, the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment adopted a Cherokee word as their motto. That Cherokee word is Kurahi. You know what Kurahi stands for? What it means? Stands alone. See, courage means that sometimes you got to stand alone. Courage means that you don't want to go with the flow. As a matter of fact, Thomas Jefferson said, in matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock. And why was it so important for the 506 Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division to adopt that name, that word, that motto, stands alone? Because in December 1944, guess where they found themselves? At a place called Bastogne, in the dead of winter, completely surrounded by the Germans. And the Germans sent them a note to the 101st Airborne Division and asked them to surrender. And General McAuliffe, the commander of the 101st Airborne Division, sent back a one-word response to the Germans, and it was nuts. When you have courage, you stand up and you look at the progressives, you look at the socialists, you look at the Marxists, you look at the communists, you look at the statists, and you tell them, you're nuts if you think you're going to take this country away from us, okay? But with courage comes the second C, and that's competence. And you can't go out there and stand up and fight. You can be the most courageous person, but if you're a dummy, hey folks, hey, all you guys have been in combat, tell me, how many people will follow a dummy into combat? You ain't, okay? You know, we don't talk too much about General George Pickett. You know that guy that led that charge on the third day of Gettysburg and wiped out 15,000 troops? We don't talk too much about that. Now, he had the courage to stand up there and make this charge against a well-entrenched Union force, but that wasn't smart. And so if you don't do as it says in the Bible, to study, to show thyself approved, what does it say in the Bible? My people suffer for lack of? My people suffer for lack of? Man, y'all, do y'all need to do push-ups? All right, I'm going to give you one more time, okay? My people suffer for lack of? So how can you be on this battlefield if you're not carrying your Constitution? See, when people come up to me and they say, well, Colonel West, why do you support Article 5 Convention of States? I said, it's in the Constitution. Well, you know, can you explain to it? Yeah, because under the system of federalism, you know, all of the real power in the United States of America is not at the federal government level. You know, I understand the duties and responsibilities of the federal government. And then the brilliance of the Founding Fathers, they came back and they wrote this thing called the 10th Amendment, which says all of the powers not specifically delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the states and to the states and to the states and to the. So why is it that we are going against something that's in our rule of law, in our Constitution, that makes sure that we do not have a federal government that steps outside their boundaries and disrespects the states and the people? And it's not going to be a runaway thing. I mean, it's not something willy-nilly. It takes 2/3 of these states here to just propose an amendment to the Constitution. 3/4 enable the states to be able to amend the Constitution. That is, again, one of those checks and balances, a fail-safe measure that the Founding Fathers put in there. But you've got to be able to quickly respond to that. Because as you know, most people, their attention span is 60 to 90 seconds. If you can't nail it, knock it out of the park in 60 to 90 seconds so that they're sitting around saying, okay, all right, kind of like, you know, was it Porky Pig? That's what you have to do. You got to look at people in the eye, look at people in the face, and with your courage and with your competence to be able to articulate the fundamentals of this great nation. See, when I hear people say that you're a threat to democracy, oh, Joe Biden standing up there. America is not a pure democracy. America is a constitutional republic. And in America, we have a system of representative democracy. So if you're telling me that I'm a threat to democracy, what you're telling me is that I'm a threat to tyranny. And I'm happy to be a threat to tyranny. That's how you completely unnerve them and take them off their game. But it takes courage and it takes competence to be able to do that. The third C is commitment. If you're going to have a call to duty, what are you committed to? What are you committed to? You're committed to the Constitution of the United States of America. That's what you're committed to. But see, there's so often that people will stand up and say, I'm committed to something, like I'm committed to marriage. But when some rough times come along, the fourth C, they ain't convicted to stand. What did Thomas Paine talk about? He said, the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from their duties. This is where we are. There's a lot of people that say, I'm committed to this. There are a lot of people that stand up and say, I'm a conservative, but are they constitutional conservatives? There are a lot of people that stand up and say, yeah, let's go out here and fight for America. But as soon as someone calls them a name, you're a racist, you're a misogynist, you're a this, you're a that. You're an Uncle Tom, you're a sellout, you're a white man's porch monkey. Yeah, that was pretty inventive, white man's porch monkey. I was like, that's pretty cool. You got me on that one. But the bottom line is this. You're looking at a guy, 22-year veteran of the United States military, paratrooper, used to jump out of airplanes, 250 pounds of gear, at 800 and 1,000 feet, been in combat zones, been shot at, been almost blown up. And you really think calling me a name is going to make me stop? So why should it make you stop? If you're committed to something, then you're convicted to it. And when the people get out there and start calling you names, you should step right up into that fire even more. You know, I think Isaiah 54:17 says, no weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. But that's the heritage of those who love the Lord. And it also says in John 16:13, there will be trials and tribulations, but be of good cheer, for I've overcome the world. It says in Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 5, that there will be trials and tribulations, but trials and tribulations produces perseverance. And perseverance produces the fifth C word, character. See, I want to run and move to the sound of the battle. That's what a warrior does. When a warrior hears the sound of battle, they don't run away. We don't want you all to go out there and associate with those sunshine patriots and those summer soldiers. What we want you to do is encourage them to step up with the same courage, the same competence, the same commitment, the same conviction, the same character that you have. Character means doing what is right when no one's watching. When the state director's not watching, you're going to do what's right. When the regional director's not watching, you're going to do what's right. When the national director and Mark Meckler is not around, you're still going to do what's right. Why? Because you have the courage to do what's right. You have the competence to do what's right. You have the commitment to do what's right. You have the conviction to do what's right. And therefore, you're going to have the character to do what's right. And therefore, if we, as this incredible grassroots organization, come together and light a fire in this nation, then the crisis that we face will slowly dissipate and go away. But what I want you to understand is that where we find ourselves in the United States of America, this didn't happen overnight. This is 50, 60, 70 years in the making. And so if you think that you're just going to go out there and this election cycle is going, I'll be solved. Okay, yeah, we're good. Let's go home. Let's go away. No. Because what ends up happening is we focus so much on election cycles instead of focusing on persevering all the way through until we can plant our standard on the high ground. See, there's going to be people that, as the drill sergeants used to call, stuck on stupid, okay? There are always going to be people out there that say, I like the government giving me something. I don't want to worry about it. There's always going to be people that say, you know, you can't have a gas-powered car. You can only have an electric vehicle car. But oh, by the way, don't charge your electric vehicle because you're going to crash the grid out there in the state of California. That's called stuck on stupid. Now, as a matter of fact, that's a special kind of stupid, okay? And that idiot was putting up billboards in Florida talking about move to California. What a... But the thing is that I don't want you to get discouraged and think that you got to go out there and get 100%. See, one of the failures of some combat leaders in the military is that they sit down and they got to believe they got to come up to with a plan that's 100% perfect. But what ends up happening is we used to see out at the National Training Center in the Mojave Desert, as soon as they make contact with the enemy, that 100% plan falls apart. And they're not ready to improvise, adapt, and overcome. What I want you to do is understand, go out there and focus on the 60 to 65%. Because there's 60 to 65% here in the United States of America. They understand what liberty is. There's 60 to 65% here in the United States of America. They want to be able to fill up their gas tank. They want to be able to go and work. They want to be able to live their lives. They want to be able to be the ones that decide what is happening with their children and their education, not indoctrination. Never forget that it was a year ago in Virginia, where the gubernatorial candidate, Terry McAuliffe, stood on a debate stage and he told us exactly who the progressive socialists left, who they are. When he said parents do not have a right in deciding what their children are being taught. And what ended up happening? People came out because education became a critical issue for them because no one wants to see their child taken away from them. And now all of a sudden we've got good, strong grassroots movement running for city councils, running for school boards. But you've got to continue to press on with that. And so there's fertile ground out there. That's what I'm trying to get you to understand. That are looking for you to have the answers. And the answers are in this document that I carry right here wherever I go, right next to my heart. And so what Mark has you all here to do is become those warriors, to answer that call to duty, to answer that call to service. Because when you think about what has made this nation what it is in 246 years, we've seen so many different crises, correct? America is great because ordinary people answer call of duty and step up and do extraordinary things. America is great because God does not call the equipped. He equips those that he calls. And that's your call to duty. So as I get ready to close, I want you to all come to your feet. That means get up. Put your heels together. Put your left hand down by your side. Raise your right hand. And repeat after me. I. State your full name. Do solemnly swear. To support and defend. The Constitution. Of the United States of America. Against all enemies. Foreign and domestic. To bear true faith and allegiance. To the same. That I take this obligation freely without any purpose of evasion or mental reservation. So help me God. You may be seated. You don't have to be a soldier, sailor, airman, marine, or Coast Guardsman to take that oath. And sadly, there are people in the House of Representatives, Senate, President, that they utter those words, but it's not in their heart. But I want you now, today, from this moment on, to remember that you took an oath to the Constitution. And now your call to duty is to do exactly what men and women have done for 246 years. To be willing to do as Abraham Lincoln said, to make the last full measure of devotion to that Constitution, to this great nation. Because history is not going to judge you based upon your house. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of people down in Fort Myers, Florida, and wherever, they don't have a house anymore. History is not going to judge you by what kind of car you have, what kind of boat you have. Because God can come along with a hurricane, a tornado, whatever, and all that can go away. But this moment in time, history will judge you as to whether or not you answered the call to duty, whether or not you made the stand, whether or not you ensured in your little space of time that the greatest nation that the world has ever known will continue on. That's your legacy. That's your testimony to your children and to your grandchildren. And you have to be courageous enough. You have to be competent enough. You have to be committed enough. You have to be convicted enough. You have to have the character to be able to say, not on my watch. That is how history will judge us. It's not easy to stand up. But when you're right and you have the moral high ground, it is easy. But it is about you being able to step outside of that box and say, as we say, the motto of the United States Army. And understand this. In 1775, June, there was an army created. In October 1775, a Navy was established. In November of 1775, a Marine Corps was established. We let those Air Force guys come like in 1948. I mean, they were the Army Air Corps, but they want their own uniform, whatever. Now we got Space Force. But the point is this. The motto of the United States Army was, "This will defend." How do you create an Army, a Navy, and a Marine Corps, but you don't have a country? You create it because there's something called liberty that is innate to each and every one of us that we all have to defend. This is your moment to defend it. And just remember that your children and grandchildren will thank you, as it said, to those who stand now, they will deserve the love of all men and women. God bless you all and thank you.
Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. Man, great man, another great friend of Convention of States. It's good to know that we have friends like that, isn't it? You guys are in the battle of your lives, the battle for the country, but we have allies and friends, a lot of them. Sometimes we watch the media and it doesn't feel like it. Sometimes we get attacks from our own side. It really doesn't feel like it, but you have allies and friends and family in Convention of States. The next guy I'm going to bring on stage is somebody that I've known for quite a few years. We've crossed paths a whole bunch of times. We've become friends over the years. He is, how would I describe Steve Deace? Maybe the most mild-mannered guy that'll come up on. Okay, I got to be honest with you, that's not true. Steve always, keeps his opinions to himself. Okay, that's not true either. The thing that I love about Steve so much, honestly, is it's true of everybody who comes up here. It's especially true of Steve. If you sit down and have lunch with Steve, what you're going to get is the same man, the same talk, the same kind of ideas, the same principles that you hear on the radio. The same things that you read in his books, and I hope you have been reading his books because, he's done an incredible job. I think he did the best job of anybody in the United States of America of exposing the evils of Dr. Fauci and Faucian bargain. Am I right? The most powerful politician in America. It's incredible. So Steve is often willing to go where others don't go. And this is a guy who, despite his rise into fame and that everybody in America now knows who he is, despite that, he's still just Steve. He really is just a regular guy. He is humble, genuinely humble. And I think, I remember sitting one night with him at the Capitol Hill Club, in Washington, D.C., which is always funny for me. It's like a Forrest Gump moment. You look around, you're like, what am I doing here? Steve and I were sitting there having dinner one night, and I remember him saying that he's like, I'm just the most unlikely guy to be here. Like, I don't even understand why God put me here. One of the great things, if you know Steve, if you listen to Steve, that you'll hear is that's a theme with Steve, is what God is doing, how God is moving, our duties according to what God gives us to do, what we are called to do. He's a man of great faith, and that is what leads him in this world. That's why he is so outspoken, because he understands both the seriousness of the moment and the charge that's been put upon all of us by God. He knows where the power is and where the glory belongs. One of the things I love about Steve, and you hear this theme over and over, the people who come on this stage, I could call them in a crisis, and most of them I have, including Steve, and say, I got a big problem, I need your help, or I just need your ear. I had one of those conversations with Steve recently, and he will pick up the phone, or he will call me back immediately. And not just for me, but for you, because he believes in you, he knows you, he loves you, and I feel the same way about him. So it is my honor, my privilege to introduce your friend and my friend, Steve Deace.
Thank you. At least 1/3 of that is true. Yeah, I mean, I really, that Capitol Hill Club dinner is still the best meal I've ever had in my life. No wonder those politicians are so fat and happy. They eat like that all the time. On your dime, by the way. I like them apples, right? Yeah. Whenever I do these, here's kind of my routine. I don't ever have a script. I don't have a script when I do my show. I don't have notes. And I just do this off the top of my head. And I get all, as best as I can, I get prayed up before I come out here. And then I let it rip. And whatever comes out of my mouth is totally not my responsibility. All right? So I'm a victim, merely a vessel. All right? I think they asked me what I wanted to talk to you about here, and not knowing exactly what the specifics would be, but the theme, I think, is pretty obvious. And I think there's a question on the table here. And I'll just be brutally honest. I don't know another way to do it. If anybody else had asked me to come here and on this kind of a schedule and give up one of the few Shabbats I have in my life, risk giving up a college football Saturday, all right, I would have said no. In fact, guys, I'll just tell you, I've probably turned down tens of thousands of dollars in speaking fees from people asking me, y'all need to schedule me, call me in May and June, all right? I mean, all kinds of people wanted me to come and speak during the fall, and I need places where I can just retreat and be a normal guy named Steve. Otherwise, this stuff will consume you, right? I mean, even the Lord took a Sabbath. This stuff will consume you. And so I rearranged my entire schedule, came down here at a very difficult flight schedule to deliver this message to you. And here's why. Because the 600 or so people that are here at this event this weekend, and I don't mean this with any exaggeration or rhetorical flourish or hyperbole at all. I want you to listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you. And if you don't remember anything I'm going to say the next 25 minutes after this, remember this. Are you ready? Ready. The people assembled in this room, and people like you, might be all that is standing between the America we know now and a civil war. And I'm going to repeat that. The people assembled in this room right now, and the people like you, are maybe all that stands between the America that we knew and a civil war. A lot of cavalier talk about civil war these days. A lot of guys with their 40-inch biceps listening to Joe Rogan all day, fake badasses. Yeah, Civil War, man, yeah. But they made sure their little daughter Misty wore a damn mask every time they took her to Costco. Our people aren't ready for any kind of Civil War. Are you freaking kidding me? Get out of here. Get out. You wouldn't walk into Rite Aid without a mask, brah. And you're going to take on the National Guard? Get the hell out of here with that. Okay, I didn't travel 2,000 miles to lie to you. Let's just tell the truth about the moment. The reality is, I believe we are being prodded into a civil war nihilistically. We have a duopolistic political system. And so because of that, there is, unfortunately, a symbiotic relationship between Republicans and Democrats, as there is in any duopoly. And when one side goes off the brink, the other side usually doesn't hold firm, but just follows them in a slower direction. That's a symbiotic relationship. And so what we have on one end of this duopoly is you have Democrats who have completely given themselves over to the spirit of the age. They have cast off all restraint. This has literally become now the devil in a red unitard with a pitchfork party. They're not even attempting to lie. They're just not even attempting to. Basically, every white woman Karen in America has cut a video for a major American hospital in the last 2 months, it seems, advertising, we're going to remove, and very nicely and politely, because they always are. We're going to remove the breast of your daughters and take the penile skin of your sons and craft a vaginal canal. Videos from places like the Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins. This is the island of Dr. Moreau stuff. And there isn't a Democrat running for office in America, from dog catcher to president, who would dare stand up to speak against it. That party is a demonic construct and has given itself totally over to the spirit of the age. Its platform is the doctrines of demons. Do not mistake that. However, its opposition is basically Jesuit priest Republicans. They have some form of theistic language that, of course, next to pitch black, looks holy. But if you were not to examine it in relationship with this doctrine over here, but just look at it unto itself, you'd never sign up for it. Wait, we're going to print 80% of all the money we've ever printed in this country in the last 6 years, and it was the Republicans who started doing it? Over a virus? I mean, Mark's from Texas. How many Texas patriots does it take to get a Texas governor to declare an invasion at the southern border? We're about to find out, because apparently every damn one of you is going to have to beg the guy to do it, apparently. You guys would never sign up for this. You'd never say, yeah, that's my team. That's my agenda. And this is why we are closer, I think, than people realize to this kind of a moment. The day before Fort Sumter, people got up in America, married their daughters and their sons, tended to their crops, ran their businesses, handled their affairs, spoke their gossips, cared greatly for their societal stations. Except the next day would not be like any other day. And things would radically change. To this day, other than the people Ralph Barrick and Anthony Fauci at EcoHealth killed with the help of the Chinese, more Americans have died in Antietam than any other event in American history. Do not cavalierly speak of civil war. And looking at the ages of those of us in this room, myself included, I'll be 50 years old next year. It won't be us that'll be fighting this. It'll be my sophomore teenage son. He'll be asked to do it. It'll be your sons that'll be asked to do it. And I think what is happening is there is a demonic spirit of the age that hates all image bearers of God, regardless of their belief system, hates them all. And on this side, he is tantalizing them with, yes, give in to your passions, give in to all of your desires. Truth is now a desire. Truth is a feeling. My truth. Give into all of that. Yes, yes, indulge. Fully knowing, as with any Faustian bargain, that these are the elements of self-destruction. The government didn't shut down gay bath orgies during the monkeypox pandemic because it cared for homosexuals, but because it does not. They're chattel. They're people for an agenda. And if you dare decide one day, yeah, I'm still same-sex attracted, but maybe I want to think for myself like a Dave Rubin or Rick Grinnell, you might as well just name yourself Donald Trump. You're not gay anymore, says the straight white kid with the Che Guevara shirt. If you're my colleague Jason Whitlock, you're not black anymore, says the Antifa kid who has to dress up in all black because he's the Bucko 5 albino that we gave swirlies to after football practice back in the day. So he's got to dress like that to intimidate you, when really you're thinking, dude, I curl what you weigh. Get out of here, okay? But then over here, we have been just lulled to sleep. And the things that ultimately matter really don't matter. What matters is what's the current price of gas. Materialistic things. Over here they talk of conviction. Over here we talk of positions. Over there they talk of generations. Over here we talk about the next election. We're like 60% of Americans in the Let's Go Brandon economy, living paycheck to paycheck. We live election to election because that's what those men pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honors for, that your God-given rights would be up for negotiation every 2 years we have an election in this country. Or with one singular vote of a Supreme Court judge you did not elect. Yes, that's why they drove the redcoats off the shores, for that. That's what they did that for. But we are so dulled by our comfort and complacency over here that we're getting outworked. And so one more time, in about 4.5 weeks, we're going to dance the time warp again. We're going to do, yet again, we're going to vote for the red waves to save us. That's what we're going to do. And it's not just going to be a red wave. It's going to be a tsunami. They're going to get annihilated. I saw Rick Santorum out in the hallway as I walked in here today. I think Rick gave one of the smartest pieces of political analysis I have ever heard. And if you guys know me, I don't compliment lightly. Okay? One of the smartest pieces of political analysis I've ever heard is I saw Rick, last time he was running for president, say, I think it was on one of the cable networks, that even if they knew, after the passage of Obamacare, do you guys know that Democrats lost over 1,000 elections in America in the next 3 election cycles after Obamacare was passed? Over 1,000 Democrats, state, local, federal, lost elections. When Donald Trump took the oath of office in January of 2017, there were the fewest Democrats in elected office in America than we had seen since before the New Deal coalition was forged, since before the Great Depression, nearly a century. They had been wiped out. But Rick made this point. He said, you know what? I think even knowing what they know now, what the political cost of Obamacare would be, I don't think they would have altered what they did one bit, because it still gave them the power and the control that they wanted. See, you're going to vote for people to save you that don't want the power and the control. They just hate you. You're going to vote to have people that hate you save you. The only party that hates you more than Democrats are the Republicans, except it's worse with them because it's personal. It's personal. You're the reason they have to pretend to care about the things that Alan West was just talking about. They wish you would just go away, vote, and then shut up while we divvy up the spoils on K Street, which is an actual street in Washington, D.C. It's an actual place where a lot of the lobbyist firms exist. So what's going to happen now is a lot of our people have woken up the last few years. There are more primary challenges than ever. There are better candidates than ever. We are running more aggressive messaging than ever. Those things are all great, but it always comes with a trade-off. See, our people are more awake than ever, and so what will happen is, for every Kerry Lake they may get in Arizona, they're going to get 10 or 15 other Republicans elsewhere that ain't worth the salt in your tears or the spit on your asphalt. And when that happens, when the Republicans don't want to govern, when they don't want to take the power that you will give them in 4.5 weeks and use it to smite your enemies, which is why you're voting for them, when they won't do that, when they will at best be traffic cones who may slow up the rate of speed, maybe you've got an extra 10 seconds to outrun the mob outside Lot's house. Where's all that energy going to go? Out here, they're not lying anymore. They're not calling tax increases investments anymore. Joe Biden's just out there outright talking about nuclear war last night, guys. There is no camouflage over here. All the talking points, if you're a boomer or a Gen Xer like me that you grew up listening to from these guys, they don't use them anymore. My job's never been easier. I don't have to decode what these people mean for you anymore. They just tell you. And so our people are awake. 4.5 weeks from now, an entire generation of under 50 Hispanics are going to do something that was previously never foreseen. They're going to vote Republican. Yeah. But they're not like you. They've not been doled into the two-party morass. They're not doing it out of some tribalistic loyalty or lesser of two evils. They earnestly believe the GOP believes their own talking points. All those border counties in Texas that are going to go red, they really believe the GOP is going to do something about immigration. They weren't here 10 years ago when people like me were writing columns and doing shows trying to stop the GOP from doing amnesty before the Democrats even talked about it for their Chamber of Commerce pimps. These people are pinning their hopes. See, your defenses have been doled. You'll just vote GOP to buy yourself some time. You're used to it. You're the frog in the boiling water now. You're the college basketball coach who is down by 20 and the other team goes on a 10-0 run. You call a timeout to stymie their momentum, and you do. But you're still down by 20. Like you stopped the current run, but you're still down by 20 points. You have grown accustomed to this. They haven't. There's all kinds of brown people that are going to vote Republican because they really think, hey, now that we're assimilated here and we're raising families here, we don't want the filth from Honduras that we left behind imported here. Stop this. In my home state, 30 counties that voted for Obama twice voted for Trump twice in Iowa. A lot of rural places that aren't like you, not Republican loyalists by a long shot, not GOP lifers. They switched because they thought Trump was their voice and meant what he said and actually did some of the stuff that he said, unlike the previous Republicans you all voted for that did none of the stuff they said or did it against you instead. There's a price to pay for bringing this new blood in. There's a price to pay for this inspiration. They will expect results. They are not partisans. They're just people. They just want to live a good life. And they actually expect the people they're going to vote for are going to help do that. Wait till they find out. Not necessarily the case here. Because Alan West was right what he told you. This has gone on for 50, 60, 70 years. And we haven't had total Democrat control for 50, 60, 70 years around here, have we? Which meant who were the enablers of a lot of what went on here over the last 50, 60, 70 years? Your Jesuit priest Republicans over here. They know some generic God talk, but they're heretics. They have no chance against this over here. They show up for the exorcism and the demons over here, they giggle and laugh. You're sending us root and branch Mitch McConnell? Oh no, please not that. They're not going to stop here. They're on the highway to hell, and they saw the sign on the side of the road that said, next stop, ash heap of history. and they floored it. They're not going to stop here. They're not going to stop them over here. And we all know it. So don't make me travel 2,000 miles to come talk to you just so we can lie to each other and urinate on each other and pretend that it's raining. They're not going to stop them. Some will try. There's always a remnant. Some good people will try. But Washington, D.C. is Capital One in the Hunger Games. It is gone. And most of the media on its best day is Caesar Flickerman. And that's when it's not actually carrying water for this demonic agenda. This is where you come in. If this energy is not going to go away, and a new energy is rising up that says we have to stop this, and then it finds out later on that with a few limited exceptions, it has no agency, it has no representation, it can't do it. The people it's going to vote for either don't have the stomach or they're okay with it. They just think too much of what they want is icky. Where will all that energy go? I know where it'll go because I've read a history book. Have you? This is what I believe we are demonically being cattle prodded into. And as a dude that doesn't want to live in a place where a pizza delivery guy either can't reach my home or is in no threat of potentially being robbed and wants to spend 8 hours a day on a Saturday watching college football, I can tell you the last damn thing I want to live through is a civil war. If we have one, it will be our own fault. We allowed this to happen because of a lack of conviction. I believe what you represent here at Convention of States, I don't believe it's a panacea. I don't believe it's a perfect solution. I do think it is fraught with some of the fears that some of our detractors have because I'm a total depravity guy and I trust human nature about as far as I can throw it, starting with my own. I also know this, just as this clock here on my time is winding down, the clock on our time here as a civilization is winding too. Can you hear it? President's talking about nuclear war out in the open. 189% higher mortgage payment today than if you bought your home the day before Joe Biden took office. 189% higher. 89% more mortgage interest if you bought your home today than if you bought it the day before Joe Biden took over. Can you hear it? We don't have baby formula, but we will inject the moms with an mRNA poisonous jab that they will pass on to their children. We'll do that, though. Because it doesn't stay in your arm. It goes to your brain, goes to your ovaries, goes to your mammary glands, goes to your testes, goes everywhere, because that's what it was intended to do. Do you know what time it is? It is late. The hour is late. The challenge before you is to remember the words of the late, great D.L. Moody. I like my way of doing something better than your way of not doing anything. Is this the most perfect solution? No. Is it fraught with some issues? Yes. But the clock on the game is ticking down. We're in the final minute of the game. I don't have the time to matriculate the ball down the field, Hank Stram. We're out of timeouts. We've got to go the length of the field here. I don't have time for a 10-play conventional drive out of your game plan. Your game plan sucks, and it failed. And so when we get to the end of the game, and one team is behind, what do they do with the ball? They chuck it as far as they can into the end zone, hoping for a miracle. Called a Hail Mary. Why did it get that name? The first time it was ever tried was by Roger Staubach in a playoff game 40 years ago, almost 50 years ago, against the Minnesota Vikings. And when they went into the huddle, he just told Drew Pearson, run down the field as far as you can, and I'll throw it as far as I can. As they approached the line of scrimmage, Staubach said a few Hail Marys. Took the snap, launched it, Pearson caught it. One of the most famous plays in NFL history. After the game, they said, what happened? He goes, I just said some Hail Marys, and Drew Pearson caught it. And from that point forward, that's what the play's been called. You are the Hail Mary here. Some people will argue, well, the citizens aren't righteous, and that's why this is dangerous. You have the wrong argument. It's the other way around. It's because the citizenry is not righteous that we need to give the faithful remnant one more Hail Mary shot to win this thing. Because when this clock goes final, this is not a perpetual game. Every civilization thinks it will last forever. They didn't read history books either. We're not even 250 years old. This is the longest concurrent experiment in human self-government and freedom in the entire history of our species, going back to Genesis 3 in the fall. Not even 250 years. The idea that we are guaranteed this forever, I don't know, did you live through the last 30 months? Can I leave my home? Can I take my kids to the park? Can I breathe free air? Can I be in the sun? Hell no, you don't get anything guaranteed forever. The game is coming close to an end. And I don't know if this will work. Here's what I do know. If we have the ball at the end of the game and we're behind on the scoreboard, we lose the game. We lose. And you can sit there and pontificate all the lint in your navel you want about the risks of throwing a Hail Mary pass. They almost never work. I know, which is why when Colorado did it successfully against my favorite team once, I'm still emotionally scarred, okay? I do know this, though. If Cordell Stewart had not thrown that ball 65 yards, they would have lost the game because we were ahead and the game would end. This game, called America, will end. Whoever's ahead on the scoreboard, raise your hand if you think you're ahead on the scoreboard, because I want whatever you took this morning, okay? This game called America will end. You are behind on the scoreboard. If we don't throw the ball into the end zone, I don't know if our guys will catch it. I don't. I do know, though, if we're holding the ball at the end of the game and the scoreboard has us behind, we lost, which makes us losers and idiots for at least not trying it. A lot of you asked me last night, how do I respond to this objection? How do I respond to that objection? How do I respond to this objection? Here's what I would say to you. First, figure out if it's an objection worthy of even responding to. Okay? And here is why. You are Nehemiah's rebuilding the wall, and I promise you, whenever you attempt to rebuild the walls of your home, of your family, of your culture, Sanballat and Tobiah always show up. And if you know your scriptures, Sanballat and Tobiah are the two pagans who come and try to get Nehemiah to come down from the wall. Let's talk. Let's debate forever. And Nehemiah, with a sword in one hand and a hammer in the other, says, I cannot come down from this wall, for I am doing a very great and important work. Most of the objections you will get are false objections. One way to find out, hey, I can see why I agree. There's inherent risk. That's why we weren't advocating this 20 years ago. There was still plenty of time in the conventional system. I'm just curious, though, then what's your solution? Oh, okay, so your plan is my one John Birch Society sheriff, who's really a great patriot in Idaho, he'll stand up to the entire 101st Airborne when they get sent in. That's your plan? Or 20 of those guys will. Clive and Bundy at all? Done that much? That's your plan. What's your plan? And maybe you just earnestly don't believe that we're at this late of an hour. Fine, I respect that. We just aren't going to agree on that then, situationally and tactically. And then move on. Kick the dust off your sandals and move on. Don't be Donald Trump calling Maggie Haberman, begging for her approval for 10, 15 damn years. Move on. Crush those people instead. You're not going to get everybody on board. One thing being a kid to a 15-year-old mom with an abusive stepdad who went to 11 different schools, K through 12 all over the country, one thing it taught me was not to need the approval of a lot of people simultaneously. It's okay if some of your friends, even great Christian patriot friends, disagree with you. Some of those people in Idaho I just mentioned are some of my friends. I just went and spoke to them a couple summers ago. They don't agree with me at all. Did it change my mind? No, because unlike what you're typically accustomed to by beings that possess penises in this era, I'm an actual man, all right? And I'm going to need more than your disappointment to change my mind if I believe in something. Thank you very much. Every minute you spend arguing with a potential false objection is a minute that you lost holding back the spirit of the age and the winds of war. I'll make a very old pop culture reference for you. The devil is Eddie Haskell, provoking each of you. And then when you're both provoked, he looks at you on the left and you on the right and says, you know, I think you guys should fight. And then just backs away and watches the show. This would be the absolute dumbest squandering of prosperity in all of human history, and there's been a lot of them. But this would be the dumbest. Putin can't freaking subdue Ukraine. A guy with one green shirt in 8 months, and he's Darth Vader? The Chi-Coms can't even subdue their own people 3 years into the COVID they unleashed on them. Who stands against us in this world? Nobody. Nobody. That's why you're getting away with $300 trillion in debt. There is no conquering army to call the note. This doesn't have to end this way. And it will only end this way by our own complacency. So I close with this encouragement to you. If you know what time it is, fight the good fight, keep the faith, and finish the race. Finish the race. Thank you.
Ramona's back, Steve. Steve Deace. Man, takes your breath away, right? That's reality. We talked about having a taste for reality. Steve has a taste for reality, and he delivers reality. This is the moment we're in. Now, technically speaking on the calendar, this is the moment we're in. So I need you guys, you're going to go straight to your workshops from here. It's pretty tight, so I need you guys to get there quickly. I know we all want to hang out in the hall and socialize.